If you grew up in the 1970s in Britain, there is a good chance you spent your childhood in the back of one of these cars. The Morris Marina, the Ford Cortina, the Austin Allegro. Millions of them were on every road, every street, outside every school in the country. And somewhere along the way, almost all of them just quietly disappeared. Stay with me today, because before we get to that, we are counting down 10 things only people who actually owned a British car in the 1970s will truly remember. Let's get stuck in. Number 10. The manual choke, every morning without fail. On any British carburettor car of the 1970s, your Cortina, your Marina, your Hillman Avenger, your Allegro, starting the engine on a cold morning was not a matter of turning a key and driving away. It was a negotiation. You pulled the choke knob, a small plastic or chrome control on the dash, which restricted airflow through the carburettor and gave the cold engine a richer fuel mix. Too much choke and it flooded. Not enough and it stalled the moment it fired. Push it back in too soon and it died on you anyway. The reason it existed was simple. Carburettors had no electronic brain to adjust the mixture automatically. That job was yours. The job stayed yours well into the 1980s. Fuel injection only spread across mass-market British family cars in the late 1980s. For anyone who learned to drive in a 1970s saloon, the choke ritual is pure muscle memory. The feel of the cable, the smell of rich fumes before the engine settled, and the quiet smugness of getting it on the first turn on a January morning. Number 9. Ice on the inside of the windscreen. If you've never sat in a 1970s British car on a winter morning and had to scrape the interior of the glass, you had a better class of vehicle than most. The problem wasn't just cold, it was moisture. Damp carpets, perished door seals, leaky windscreen rubbers, and overnight temperature drops condensed on cold glass and, in hard frosts, froze solid on the inside. The heaters and demisters on most 1970s British family cars were not, to put it diplomatically, adequate. Small fans, convoluted ducting, and a heat output that barely troubled the frost. Ford's heated front windscreen, the technology that finally solved this properly, didn't appear until the mid-1980s. So you scraped the inside with a store card or the back of your sleeve, cracked the window to get some airflow, and set off peering through a small porthole that was already misting over again. It'll clear in a minute. Number 8. Vinyl seats, the summer torture. Slide onto the front bench of a 1970s British saloon on a July afternoon, and the backs of your legs would immediately bond with the seat covering in a way that was less upholstery and more hostage situation. Vinyl got hot in the sun and rock hard in the frost, and in between it had a smell, warm plastic, old foam, a trace of petrol, and more often than not, a decade of pipe tobacco. No modern car interior has ever come close to replicating that. Cloth seats were an upgrade. Velour was luxury. The Cortina GXL buyer got simulated wood trim and glorious velour as part of his executive package. Everyone else got the vinyl and was quietly told it was easy to wipe down. Restorers today will tell you that finding correct spec period vinyl, matching the original grain and color, is now significantly more difficult and expensive than the original seats ever were. Number 7. Sunday morning on the driveway, bonnet up, the Haynes manual propped open against the airbox. Every 3,000 miles, a family car from the 1970s required you to check and adjust the contact breaker points, reset the plug gaps with a feeler gauge, check the ignition timing, and adjust the carburettor mixture. These were not optional extras suggested by enthusiasts. They were the official maintenance schedule. Treating them as normal was what owning a car meant. And every few years, When performance dropped off, came the bigger job, a decoke. Off with the cylinder head, away with the carbon deposits, and the engine breathed properly again. The Haynes Owner's Workshop Manual was the Bible for all of it. What most people do not know is where it started. In 1965, a young RAF serviceman named John Haynes was stationed at a base in Aden, in what is now Yemen, and dismantled an Austin Healey Frog Eye Sprite. He wrote up every step as a proper workshop manual. He printed 3,000 copies. They sold out in 6 months. By the time British families were attacking their marinas on Sunday mornings in the 1970s, more than 200 million Haynes manuals had been sold worldwide. The company is still publishing. Number 6, and this is where the petrol station gets interesting. Filling up in the 1970s was part of a whole loyalty economy. The most famous was Green Shield stamps. You collected them at filling stations and supermarkets, licked them into books, and redeemed them from a catalogue. By the mid-1970s, the catalogue offered a Philips color television for 375 books, a chest freezer for 140, and, in what may be the most 1970s sentence in existence, any British car, ask for a quotation. The motorboat cost 217,600 stamps, representing around £5,500 of spending at 1970s prices, which was roughly the price of a large detached house. Green Shield's catalogue stores were rebranded as Argos in July 1973. You've been spending petrol stamps at Argos ever since, you just didn't know it. Then there were the Esso World Cup coins. In 1970, Esso commissioned 30 solid metal coins depicting the England squad for the Mexico World Cup. One coin came with every purchase of over 4 gallons. The promotion was significant enough to reach the House of Lords, where judges had to rule on whether coins described as going free with a petrol purchase constituted a taxable sale of goods. The Lords found narrowly that they did not. A sterling silver edition was produced and presented to Sir Alf Ramsey, to each England player, and to the directors of Esso Petroleum. A complete set today sells for considerably more than 4 gallons of 4-star ever did. Number 5, the AA badge on the grille and the yellow box by the road. A yellow enamel AA badge on your front bumper was, in the 1970s, a mark of prudence and membership. You had paid your subscription, you were in the club, and if anything went wrong, and on a 1970s British family car something would go wrong, the patrolman would arrive and sort it out. There were even rumours, never officially confirmed, that police gave preferential treatment to cars with an AA badge on the grille. The AA's grille badges ran numbered from 1906. But the deeper nostalgia is the roadside telephone boxes, those yellow painted booths placed along A roads where you walked to call for help. There were around 787 of them in place by 1968, a national network built over decades. Each one was a reassuring sight to a driver with a steaming radiator on a bank holiday afternoon. Today, 19 of those boxes survive in their original locations. 19 from 787. Number 4, the RoSPA wheel and its humbler cousin, the hubcap that didn't stay. Made under license by Rubery Owen, hence RO style, the RoSPA was a pressed steel wheel painted to look from a reasonable distance like a proper cast alloy. On a Cortina 1600E or an MGB GT, it looked genuinely smart. The Rubery Owen sales manager later said, "We changed the face of motoring and mag wheels followed us as their reliability improved." For every driver with RoSPA, there were 5 with simple chromed hubcaps clipped to steel wheels, and those hubcaps had a relationship with British roundabouts that could only be described as brief. One sharp turn, one pothole, and it was rolling away across the verge. The RoSPA's longevity is quietly remarkable. It first appeared in the mid-1960s and was still the only wheel option on the Range Rover until 1986, 20 years into production. It remained available on short-wheelbase Land Rovers until 1995. The wheel that once signaled a 1970s salesman's ambition was still being fitted to working farm vehicles well into the Britpop era. Number 3, and this one requires a short detour into some of British Leyland's more creative decision-making. The Austin Allegro, launched in 1973, was supposed to be a fresh start. The marketing department had decided it needed larger, more heavily padded seats to signal luxury. The problem was that bigger seats pushed the driver closer to the steering column, leaving no room for a standard round wheel. The solution, which must have seemed reasonable at the time, was to design a new shape entirely. They called it the Quartic wheel. It was roughly rectangular with rounded corners, and it was described at launch as avant-garde and high-tech. When the motoring press were invited to see the Allegro before its launch, they were unanimous in their view. They were merciless. The wheel was dropped in 1974, replaced by a conventional round one with no public announcement and no admission of any mistake. The Quartic simply stopped appearing. The detail that really earns its place in history is this. Some owners' manuals for later Allegros, the ones fitted with a perfectly normal round wheel, still described in enthusiastic terms the many benefits of the Quartic that was no longer there. Number 2. The back seat of a 1970s British family car was, by any modern standard, a state of nature. Children lay across bench seats. They stretched out in the boot of the estate, facing backwards, waving at lorry drivers on the motorway. They sat on the parcel shelf under the rear window. Babies went in carry cots placed loose on the back seat. Nobody wore a belt in the back because on most 1970s cars there were none. Front seatbelt wearing became compulsory in Britain on the 31st of January 1983. The entire decade of the 1970s had passed without any legal requirement to put one on at all, even in the front. Rear seatbelts only had to be fitted to new cars from 1987. Children under 14 were required to wear them from 1989. Adult rear passengers were required to wear them from 1991. For every year, those Cortinas, Marinas, and Allegros were being driven as family cars. The back seat was completely unregulated. When the front belt law came in, 90% of drivers complied within weeks. Protecting rear passengers took another 8 years. And at number 1, rust, the tin worm. The reason almost none of them are left. The 1970s British family car dissolved, not gradually over decades, quickly, sills gone by year 3, wheel arches bubbling by year 5, floor pans crumbling, boot floors soft, structural sections you could push a finger through. The repair ritual was body filler, fiberglass matting, primer from a rattle can, and quiet prayers before the MOT. The cause was damning. British mass-market bodies were built from inadequately treated steel with patchy phosphating, poor undersealing, and no cavity wax injection in the seams. In a wet climate, on salted winter roads, they did not stand a chance. Quality control problems during British Leyland strike years meant cars were leaving the factory with gaps in their protective coatings. The Morris Marina's upmarket variants were even fitted with decorative stainless steel wheel arc trims, which by trapping moisture and setting up galvanic corrosion between two different metals, actively accelerated the rust they were meant to dress up. Here is what all of that means today. The Morris Marina, over 1 million were built in Britain. Government registration data shows 32 are still licensed on British roads. The Austin Allegro, 642,000 made, 17 are currently taxed for the road. The Ford Cortina Mark III was the best-selling car in Britain for 6 consecutive years. 9 of them survive on record in the entire country. 9. Those cars were everywhere. They were ordinary. They were unremarkable. They were what Britain drove. And the tin worm took nearly all of them, quietly, one sill at a time. So there it is. 10 things only a 1970s British car owner will truly remember. From the cold morning choke ritual to the hot vinyl seats, the SO coins in the glove box, the AA box by the road, and the rust that took almost all of them in the end. Did your family own one of these cars? Which one, and what do you remember most? Let me know in the comments below.